Lesli Skolarus is an assistant professor of neurology here at the University of Michigan Medical School. And she is going to talk about her slightly unconventional K-to-R transition, as will Jim Burke, who is also an assistant professor of neurology.
Do I talk from
Oh yeah, we can turn that microphone
here?
around.
Can you hear me without it, or should I turn it on? Oh.
Even you did.
I talk so loud. Now can you hear me? Okay, so I am Lesli Skolarus. I sort of cringed when I was invited to give this talk because I think it is the sure way never to get funded again. So, but since Will is a friend of mine, here I am giving it. So these are basically, I'm assuming that many of you have went to talks like this in the past, and these are sort of the classic things, take-home messages that we have distilled down from hearing many of these talks. Oh, I'm sorry, I should say, before I launch into this, this is designed to be short, so, and then afterwards, hopefully we'll have a question and answer discussion, so you guys can ask us questions. And any of this is our opinions, obviously. So the conventional story is that you are somewhere in your career, you develop a passion for a research topic. For this group, it's probably for some clinical trial apparatus. Then you are percolating along, and that passion goes into a K award. Then you're in this very supportive environment, which enables you to complete your K in a timely fashion. And then you've written it such that the K, aims 1 and 2 are your K award, aims 3 is you're going to transition that K award into an R. Then you write your R during year 4 of your K, and then you're funded during year 5, and you go along your way. So that's exactly how it should work. It doesn't work that way. It didn't work that way for us, but that is sort of the classic story. So I guess the key elements of the story are that you have a bright, hardworking researcher. That's you guys. I'm assuming that I looked at the schedule for this conference that you're attending. It looked really full and sort of painful. So I'm assuming that that is all you guys or you wouldn't have signed up for this. You then have an excellent, highly motivated mentor. And that means many things. Not only does it mean meeting with you, it means they have resources such as money, space, and personnel that they'll share with you. The K budget is $50,000 a year, and it's not enough money to do projects. So you need other support and other help somewhere along the way. That support can come from your mentor or can come from your chair, who also can provide help with extra money, space, or personnel. I think you need enough protected time to really actually make it happen. So when people put in Ks, you're supposed to have 25% of your time spent on things other than your K. You get 75% on your K award. That is sliced and diced many different ways. And you have to have the protected time to do it. And then the other part is that, again, you're sort of thinking about your R when you're writing your K. So those are the traditional methods in 3 minutes. So this is what I did. So this is my part of the story. So I did residency at WashU. I didn't stay there for fellowship. WashU at that time did tons of imaging research. I think imaging research is cool from I like to use the product of it, but not cool like I'm going to advance the science of it. So I knew that wasn't for me. I barely got through physics in undergrad. So I knew that wasn't for me. I was really interested in stroke disparities. And so I talked to Bill Powers was there at the time. I said, this is what I want to do. I think your program is great, but it's not what I want to do. He said, you should go to U of M. I'll call Lewis. He called Lewis, and I went to U of M. I didn't interview anywhere else. It was sort of a very linear approach. I then came to U of M, and I did 3 years of fellowship, which I think is sort of different than what some people do. So I did a clinical year of a vascular neurology fellowship. So I did ACG in a year. And then I did 2 years of research training, which was funded by the American Academy of Neurology Clinical Research Award. I wrote that thing in my first year of arriving, in my first month of arriving as a fellow. So I actually had my first child at the end of residency. So I started fellowship in September, and I wrote that that thing in the 3 weeks between when I first got there. So I really have to thank mostly Lewis and particularly Devin Brown, who was actually a piece of our project, for supporting me in doing that. So they really didn't know me at all, and I just said, I want to do this. So I knew lots of people who had gotten them. I thought, oh, this should be great. I should do this. This is what everybody does. And so I did it, and I was supported by that. That was incredibly helpful, and I will forever be indebted to the AEN because it gives you 2 years of fellow salary support. So I wasn't making for those 3 years of fellowship, I was making sort of a fellow salary. But what it does is it provides money for education. So with that, I was able to get a master's degree in health and healthcare research, which was really, really important. That it was sort of setting up sort of how to do research and research methods at the time that I needed to do them. Jim and I did the same master's program a year apart. It's a very broad program. We learned very different things out of the same program. So I would highly recommend something like that. I then wrote a K award. I became, the timeline is next. I wrote a K award it would be in my first year of my research fellowship that was then funded, and then I became an assistant professor. I'll come back to this last part of the slide in a minute. So that seems really sort of traditional. Looks like, so this, you don't have to look at all of this, but I think that this is the piece when I was thinking about this that gets funded. So it seems very linear, but it's not. So this is a list of all the grants I've submitted, ones that are funded, and what I'm doing with them. So it's not as though I've just written one grant, one R, and got an R funded. So I started out with that AAN fellowship thing, then I started out with a K. And then after that, I became really interested in social networks and how your social network impacts your health. So I wrote, there was a call for proposals for an R21 from OBSSR. I really knew nothing about social networks, but I kind of thought they were cool. So I wrote an R21 in year one of my K award, which was really crazy and was like a totally shoot the moon thing. It was not funded, shockingly. And then but then I had this whole grant written that I really was painful to do. So then I submitted that internally, had internal funding, and we did that. We did the program, we did the grant. It was, it's done. They were sort of right, it's not that interesting, but it's done. So that kind of died, a slow, painful death. And then in year two of my K award, the NINDS had a big call for proposals for U54s, for stroke disparities grants that my group put in. I was a PI on one of those projects, so I wrote an R for one of those projects. We were not funded. That was also a lot of work. I wrote that in year two of my K award. So like I said, you're supposed to be writing these R's in year four, but I'm writing sort of R grants very early. I then took a piece of that grant and broke it up into an R21 that got funded. That was in year three. Then in brainstorming about how much to put in for the U54, I wanted to do stuff with technology. And so I wrote two grants, one using IVR, so interactive voice response, where it's like robocalls, where you answer the call and you respondents put in responses, and then you get sort of personalized feedback. So I wrote an internal grant to do that, and an internal grant to do text messaging. Those were both funded. And we'll talk about this the R grant sort of at the end. So then we wrote an R. I was in year three of my K award when we wrote it, that was funded. And then I took both of those, one of those technology grants, which Will and I just submitted a NHLBI R34 clinical trials grant to do, so using prelim data. And then the last piece is finally, we are now submitting in August the follow-up to my K award. So the K award was I'm in year 4 now, so the KO now we're sort of ready to submit the next step. So I think that when I see these talks before, you just see like this stuff. So I had my K, and then I was really successful and I got an R. But like there's a lot of I wrote a lot of grants and did a lot of things in order to do that. Okay, next. I can't tell your story.
So Leslie's impossible to follow always, but I'm going to tell a similar story but a shorter version of it, and not go into quite as much detail. And then what I want to do is sort of summarize kind of the key points. And I would also like to reiterate the first thing Leslie said, which was neither of us feel like we're remote experts on this, and we're just sort of more or less telling the story. And that involves, unfortunately, telling a bunch of uncomfortable biographical details. This is more or less the only way to tell it. And so we apologize for this and know that nobody actually likes to listen to anybody tell their life story. It's all that makes no sense. So I have a very similar starting point to neurology residency and a 1-year Master of Neurology Fellowship. My research interests sort of diverged early on, and were kind of already a bit atypical in terms of how you go about getting research funding. So my research interest has been for a while more about how to make our healthcare system work better. And sort of going through residency and vascular neurology fellowship, sort of the word for this that I kind of learned is health services research. And so that's kind of who I think that I am. And then during residency, I applied to this Robert Wood Johnson Clinical Scholars Program, which is a health services research training and mentorship program, through which I did the same master's program that Lesli did. And also I had quite considerably important mentorship during that, doing more health services research type of stuff. What that looked like interest-wise for me initially was more about how can we use resources efficiently and effectively in medicine in general and in neurology in particular. And as I went through that, my interests, my ability to formulate research questions improved and my research interests evolved, such that I focused more on trying to use those methods and trying to find more practical clinical applications of them, specifically trying to figure out how we can take clinical trial data and do a better job taking that to individual patients. That sort of became the core of the K that I put in during second year of the Clinical Scholars Program. I did, much like Lesli, in sort of optional third year, kind of to buy me some time to put in a resubmission to give myself as much control as possible. Fortunately, the K got funded, and then I became an assistant professor here and kind of went forward from there. For me, and I think most germane to the story where Lesli and I overlap, is that I then kind of had this like relatively free year. So I've been planning to, this was the year I was going to be expecting my first K when it get funded, and I put in another plan, and it turned out that it would have worked out well enough the first time that I kind of had this chunk of time. And with this chunk of time, what I consciously did, or I sort of consciously did anyway, was to take my already somewhat diffuse research interests and to make them more diffuse, which is exactly the opposite of all the advice that I was given before, during, and after that time. But it actually kind of didn't work out, or at least so far it hasn't backfired massively. In any event, what I did during that time was kind of reach out and try to find people to collaborate with across departments, across subdivisions, and look for other ways where you could take the skills that I had using things like secondary data and using analytic techniques that aren't necessarily entirely typical in clinical research and look like we're ready to sort of move out of it. One of the things that came out of that was this work with the National Health Aging and Trends study. This is a relatively new study that was sort of a follow-up to the long-term, National Long-Term Care Study, where basically NIA has funded this very large survey research project where they go into the homes annually and longitudinally of about 6,000, actually 8,000 elderly Americans and find out everything about how they're functioning in their homes. And once we heard about MS, sort of Lesli and I had one of these threads that we've been cultivating was trying to explore and understand the question of how people after stroke, how this massive variability in outcomes, what are some of the things that underlie that? And we started poking with that question with MS. So one of these research threads that I'm following during this particularly diffuse time is kind of pushing down that angle on where NHAT might take us. So we kind of wrote a couple of straightforward papers just trying to see what was happening in the stroke population here, and specifically focusing on our shared interest in disparities. We basically had written the second of these papers. I think it was someplace in the process of being submitted when we came across a newly released RFA from NINDS-CTMC that was focused on using secondary data to understand and improve disparities. And essentially what happened was, and this was the extremely fortuitous element, which was, if you look at the discussion section of the last paper we'd written, it was laying out the research agenda that was directly applicable to this. So this was, for me, my first year of my K, and I think Lesli, the third year. Third year. And so neither of us at this point in time was necessarily chomping at the bit and thinking this was a great direction for us. But we felt like the RFA was something that was really on point, something where we sort of already kind of done the preliminary work, and we really thought we knew how to go about figuring this out. And so we said, well, while this is perhaps not the most intelligent thing time-wise, it seemed like a great opportunity to put it in. We had lots of things working in our favor to that end. One of which was we have, in spite of having similar training, sort of orthogonal skill sets in terms of how we could represent ourselves in the type of work that we've done. And so I've done lots of secondary data type of stuff. Leslie's done much more disparities type of work, and kind of coming together, we sort of were able, I think, make a good argument that we'd be good co-primary investigators. We also, this was one of the things that I think is part of the conventional story, is we were in a fantastic environment where we had access to all kinds of resources. And so if we want to go out there, for example, and get a ton of Medicare data, we have people to work with who could help us go through that time-consuming, elaborate, and bureaucratic process, and who knew how to navigate that. We were able to get those types of folks on board and sort of convince a review panel that we'd actually be able to do this. And like I said, able to capitalize on our orthogonal skill sets. So that was the quick version of kind of where we went into. We sort of wrote this up. We thought the proposal looked pretty good. It actually ended up getting funded. And that is sort of like the end of the K to R transition story. In terms of summarizing what are kind of the conventional parts of the story, I mean, this is why we call it slightly unconventional, is that many of the things that you sort of hear about that conventional narrative about how you go from starting in research, getting a K, getting an R, were certainly true here. We both had great mentors, we were both in a great environment, we were a remarkably supportive chair, we actually had our protected time. I mean, many of those elements, most of the elements of that story, I think were instantiated in our experience. There are a couple parts, though, I think were unconventional, and I think we've probably prefaced them through sort of telling our stories. One is the relative importance of collaborators and peers as opposed to mentors and chairs. So when we sort of heard this story told before about how you go from a K to an R, everyone says mentor, 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 chair, 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 chair. And sort of our experience was, well, they helped and they were great, and I have nary a bad word to say about them, even if they were listening. And if, I don't know if there's any mics in but no, we
were being recorded. They'll be posted to the internet.
Okay. No, we have literally no bad things to say about any of them. They've been great for us. But, for us, our collaboration was kind of, I think, really, really a key part of this, which was, I don't think either of us on our own would have been well-positioned or able to even really think about how to do this well. And this really was sort of a purely collaborative effort. It was overlapping both methodologic skill sets, overlapping ways of thinking, different ways of communicating, and that there really was all of the slightly hokey things that you say about how collaboration is supposed to work. All of that really worked. And that was a really important thing for us. Related to that was, not only was our collaboration important, but also, and sort of Lesli alluded to this, that one of those research threads that I talked about developing was working with other sort of people in neurology with health services research interest focus. And sort of over the prior couple of years, that helped us develop skills, helped us write the papers, and got us there at the same time. So it was not only collaboration between the two of us, which was extremely important, but also, too, it was collaboration with other peers on a whole variety of different projects to help improve our understanding of how the world works, improving our understanding of how to do research, and helping develop skills. The other, I think, probably the biggest divergence, particularly, I think, for my version of the narrative, is that, when I've heard these stories told, they're always told retrospectively, and someone's looking backwards and drawing a line through their experience. And I think when we sort of, when that line is drawn, it often sounds very linear, right? It sounds like, a shortly after coming out of the womb, you convinced this research idea, and then you marched through your entire life. And then you got a K, and then you had an R, and then you became famous around Iowa in 20 years later. Like that's sort of, you hear the story told from the end, and then people look back, and when they do that, they draw a line. And sort of, I think our experience was that that is not remotely how things work. And whether or not that's a generalizable lesson, I would not remotely make any wagers. But I think for us, the story was much more about the importance of flexibility and variability, as opposed to sort of having a clearly specified research agenda that you're following all the way through. I mean, for us, this was something you see very much because of the various grants that Leslie put in. It was sort of as opportunities came up, it was pivoting and taking a relatively broad skill set and being able to move there. I think for me, sort of the version of the story was, cultivating different skills, cultivating different collaborations, made us well positioned. So when an opportunity came along, we were able to sort of fit to it, as opposed to sort of needing exactly, only one way forward. There was lots of possible ways forward, and you kind of, when it comes to writing the grants part of life, you prioritize those opportunities, at least in small part, on the basis of which of those things are most likely to be funded. And so when those opportunities come arise, you've got the pieces in place to be able to take advantage of. And that was all we had to say. So I will leave that there. And we've got a question. Do you want to talk about this, Leslie?
Yes.
I had some questions too, but I'll let them go first.
So congrats on the R. I just had a question about some of the feedback I've gotten about like early stage or new investigators going in as co-PIs was pretty negative, and then also within the same institution, within the same department even. So did you guys get any pushback, feedback on that, or any thoughts?
I think the
Question.
yeah.
We thought about it a lot.
Yeah, that's right. We talked about this a ton. There was a couple different levels of this, right? One is what happens to the competitiveness of the proposal having two relatively junior people as co-PIs. What are co-PIs? I mean, no one really seems to know what co-PIs are supposed to be, how this is supposed to work. I think that we felt like we had a really good argument that this was what the co-PI concept was supposed to do, right? It was one of those, here's the parts of the project that Leslie's really experienced at and really good at. Here are the parts of the project that I'm experienced and good at, and like together, the argument we felt like the argument worked well, and so I thought we had a pretty reasonable basis to advance it on. We also got variable feedback about what that meant. So the other interesting element that we also heard varying and ongoing varying feedback is what does this mean like down the road, right? So like, our promotion structure is sort of set up about, okay, you need papers, and you need grants, and you want a K and then an R, and that's kind of when you get promoted. And the implications of co-PI status on that, does that count as the thing that you need for promotion? It's not entirely clear, although most people seem to think probably it does. But we'll sort of see how all that works out.
It'll count.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly comment on that, first of all, it's important to have a good argument for why you need multiple PIs, but it will absolutely count, and we're going to talk about the science of team science quite a bit in the next talk.
Really?
Did you want to add to that, Leslie?
So I think we also talked about sort of, we both blew our ESI status on this. And so I think that, we talked about it a lot and decided like, what is more important, like having an R or having the ESI? We decided like having the R for our next sort of go around. But I'm not sure. We don't, and I truly believe today, with the retrospective scope, we wouldn't have got it if we weren't both co-PIs. So.
Although, as Steve Korn pointed out yesterday, there was a mandate that the ESI status was to reduce the pay line a great deal, and the mandate expired. Many institutes are choosing to continue to do it, but the institutes no longer have it's no longer the law that they have to do it. So I think you picked a good time to say, all right, but maybe it was because I'm sure you guys were reading the Federal Register in detail. Other questions?
Can I make one comment about that? Just to keep in mind that these guys both went in as basically new investigators. If one of them had been senior, so if Lewis Morgenstern and Leslie, so Lewis is the one that Leslie was referring to, that's a very senior funded neurologist. If she had gone in with Lewis, she would have sacrificed her new investigator status because Lewis is not if they were co-PIs. So the fact that you guys were both early career was actually good because you counted, now you both gave it up, but it probably worked, is my point. And if you had gone in with someone senior, it doesn't count at all. Does that make sense to everyone? You will sacrifice that status if you go in as a co-PI with somebody who already has R1 level funding at any time in their career.
And just to maybe put a little other historical perspective on this is I think that the thinking on that evolved over time. I finished my fellowship. I did the same fellowship as these two, even though in an emergency position. They let me kind of be a wannabe neurologist. But Lesli started right after me, and I think Jim started right after Lesli. Maybe there was a year in between, something along those times. And we had the same primary mentor, and I was set under no, there was a project that would have made sense for me to be in the multiple PI plan with another junior investigator on, and he said, no, don't do it. But his thinking on it evolved over time, so it made sense for them in that project. So I think the hard and fast rule of never do that. I think if you have the right mentorship team, the administrative structure, if the administrative structure makes sense, and you have to read the NIH guidance on multiple PI plans, you have to be bringing something unique to the table. It's not like, okay, two people who can do exactly the same thing. In one case, an emergency physician and a neurologist, that may be a really good combination for an acute trial. You just have to think about, could a multiple PI plan work? I think one of the things that's been really, really cool about what they've been doing is, and I think this is one of the things we're trying to foster in this course, knowing that some of the groups have a mixture of ideas, or a mixture of projects than others, is that there is a lot that you can learn from your peers, and a lot you can learn from collaborating from your peers. So I think Jim's points about this, it's all about the mentor and the chairs. It's also a lot about, I think many of us have found this, the people who are sort of in the same state as you within your departments, or even across departments if you're from a smaller department, who are in similar areas who can help push you, right? Because if you have a paper to do, and Lesli has a paper to do, and Jim has a paper to do, and I have the revisions on the paper that they're on that I need to turn in, right? You have more people that you're accountable to, but being accountable to your chair is fine, but there's a lot of people who you're keeping track of, and it's having those microclimates of junior investigators who are working together to move towards that common goal of getting publications out and getting grants out is important. One, I don't know if you guys could briefly summarize, but I think maybe to sort of paint this in a little bit more relief, if you could briefly sort of contrast the aims of your K with the aims of the R. Or if you don't remember, we can...
Very different.
Yeah. I mean, there is no similarity.
Yeah.
They were totally different. So I guess the nonlinearity part here was really striking. I mean, I probably tried to make an argument that they were in some way, shape, or form related, but I didn't believe it.
So actually, can you flesh that out a little bit? Because there's sometimes as you go through your K, you're sort of realizing, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life, but I guess I have to show some vague links so it doesn't look like there's sort of jumping tracks. So can you talk about that, navigating that sort of line?
Well, okay. So I think we probably did this before.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, sure. So my K is a CBPR project, so Community-Based Research Project in Flint, Michigan, which is an underserved African American community where we're doing stroke preparedness, so stroke warning signs and the importance of calling 911. So I love that project. But it, in terms of academic productivity, is like a wasteland. So I will have tons of work put into it and 4 total papers from a K award from that. So that could never, if that's all I did, it would have been, my career would be over. And so what we did, so that's sort of an aside. So that project is now going to go into an R, or it's going into a U, or one, but anyway, regardless. It's going somewhere, but not in this grant. So the R grant, the aims of the R grant are to look at, usually, and has linked to Medicare, to look at racial disparities in stroke survivors, and to look at the things associated with that. So what I leveraged for my K was that I was a stroke disparities researcher, and that Post-stroke disability was important in the community, and I had focus group data to say that, that we had done sort of in the K award. So we leveraged that, but in terms of the methods or anything we're going to do, it is really orthogonal. That being said, the review panel loved that.
So I would say that that is the right way to think about it. It's not about your specific aims in the actual data. Some of you will be lucky enough to take your K data and move it to your preliminary data section in your R, but most of you won't. It's about the overall skill set that you learn in that 5 years. Remember, it's career development. It's taking that skill set and saying, I am now unique and have the skill set, so I can do this project, and look how productive I've been on my K I publish. But it doesn't have to be the same or a linear scientific path. I totally agree with Lesli.
So that was something I think when we were writing it became really clear, right? So it felt uncomfortable when you started putting it together for that reason. But as you were writing it, you're making the case like, can we do this? The answer was, yeah. And so Lesli had this thematic and sort of conceptual area of consistency. And for me, it was more about the methods consistency, saying, yeah, I've worked with all this type of data before, I've used all these methods before, we can make this happen. And that there were, there was, there was a non-trivial line where I could sort of chart the themes that I was working on were also related themes here. But I think that was the similarity, right? It wasn't like the aims did not represent themselves. They were completely different things. They looked like they were from totally different universes. But there was a reasonable argument for both of us that the skills and experience and knowledge that you gained from it will position you now to be able to do this thing well.
But I think neither of us could have done that, could have done it without the other one. So like we couldn't have taken your K or my K and transitioned it into this R. We could only sort of put them both together and then transition it to the R. Anybody else?
Going on. Going 20. Let's see. We've got, we're about 15 minutes early. Do you guys do karaoke?
I actually had a question, maybe not as much for you, but in general, how you go, like you're in a very large environment where you find basically whatever collaborator you need is somewhere hiding in the building, and it's more a matter of
We don't have an agriculture school.
Yeah, there are Spartans. But the question is like for smaller institutions where you can't find your mentors and collaborators in your own institution, how to go out to develop these relationships outside, and of course and how to do that to bring them in, like into a grant or something.
Talk about that.
Yeah, I think that probably us from Michigan aren't good at answering that.
So a lot of what we see on the Ks is a lot of co-mentors. So again, this concept that different people are bringing different unique areas of expertise is great. And for those of you who are thinking about Ks that are at smaller institutions, you can have a mentor who is at another institution. But there are some things that the review team likes to see if you have that. Number one, you already have an established relationship. You can't just pick up the phone and call somebody from California and say, hey, will you be my mentor? It starts, in 6 months, and you've never worked with them. They don't like that. And they do tend to like to have you have at least one of your major mentors at the local institution. So for example, Lesli could have had a stroke neurologist at Michigan and a disparities person in New York City, right? And that might have worked if she already had a relationship with that person in New York City. Having all your mentors remote is not a good idea. The other thing I would say is if you're going to have mentors that are remote, have a regular schedule of meeting. You can't do we will meet as needed. The review committee does not like that either. It's got to be regularly scheduled, and it's best if you demonstrate you're already doing it. Does that make sense? You're already meeting with them monthly by Skype or by phone, and you meet with them twice a year at national meetings, and you're going to continue that relationship. Does that start to answer your question?
Yeah, for the K it does, but like what about for the R? You just pull whatever you need
Yeah, I would say for the R, remember, you don't need formal mentors, so it's a little looser, but you have the whole national scope now to work with at the R level. And again, your peers in this room hopefully will be peers of yours going forward. That's part of the beauty of these group kind of career development programs, is that you will, Greg Cassell and I were peers when we had our Ks, and we've worked together for decades now. So you will maintain some peer relationships and help each other.
Less than 2 decades.
For the record, I'm a lot older than that.
If I could just chime in on that, I mean, I think when you're building an R grant, you're not constrained in the K the way you are. And you just want to build the best team, to the point that these guys said, we can make the best grant if we work together because we have different skill sets. If there's a colleague somewhere else that brings something to your grant that's going to help sell it as the best product, you want to put your best product out there. And a lot of what we've seen in our small group, for example, is discussions like, I don't want to have to spend too much money, but when you're bringing together a big grant, like a clinical trial, you're just wanting to make it the most successful grant possible. You want the clinical trial to work, have the greatest chance of succeeding. Spend the money. Much better to spend the money and have all the details really covered, bring all the skills and services that you need, than to under budget. That will never fly at review.
I had a question about collaborators. So I'm not a basic scientist, and some of the collaborators at our university I'd like to work with are basic scientists. And so when you include experts in fields that are very different from yours, how do you tie that into your effort and your project without being, well, they're going to do all of the lab work, and I'm going to bring in the patients from the clinical side and work on the intellectual ideas. So how do you tie those two together?
So I guess there's a, I don't know that there's a simple answer to that, right? And so I guess my experience is, personally, I've tried to cultivate a number of those different types of collaborations, and sort of with different types of people. And so in part with basic scientists, it was a question, I mean, I'm sort of thinking this through as I talk about it, but I think part of it is it's sort of like, what is the trade-off? Like, what can I bring to the table and what can you bring to the table? So, for example, like, in terms of the methods and data that I'm familiar with working with, there's a whole host of clinical questions that you can use to address this. So I'm a stroke researcher, and that's kind of where I start from. But, we have a whole bunch of really smart basic scientists who have other questions that you can plausibly, bring to this framework. And so, some of the type of collaborations that have worked with basic scientists have been, okay, here's what we can do. Let's work to formulate the question together. I can then sort of help us get to results, figure out how to do the process and move towards results. And then we can collaborate then on writing it as well. Because there's the parts of having to really know a domain in great detail and being the absolute expert on it becomes a problem in writing things. So I've worked with a couple basic scientists here writing, we built some simulation models to look at Alzheimer's disease and what pre-symptomatic treatment would look like, and what the trade-offs would look like, how well would this have to work, how much harm could you have, trying to suss out those parameters. And so I know how to do the methods, right? And I can understand that this question was important, but being able to figure out how to formulate that and how to write that was something where somebody else could help. Now on this, we worked with very closely, this is probably a substantial omission from the talk, one of the people who was deeply involved in the design and day-to-day running of this National Health Aging Trend Study, and she was unbelievably helpful in terms of figuring out how to work with these databases. So what we brought to her was, sort of the trade-off was, we were able to help her write more papers and move into a space, stroke, that she thought was important, but that she didn't have the clinical expertise on. But she was the absolute expert in terms of the survey, exactly how to formulate the questions, exactly which elements we're supposed to be using, how we're supposed to be using them, and how we can do it better. She's been unbelievably great. And so I think that's kind of been my general understanding, is that you have to have that sort of trade-off. Here's what I bring to the table, what you bring to the table, and together we can go push this towards a question that works. I think the general answer.
Yeah. She's a demographer, so very different from what we do.
So two things to say. As you set that up and when you're writing it up, you have to show that you're clearly working with that other person. So, and this just goes to help further your project, is to set up regular meetings. And all sorts of things happen out of those meetings. Like you think, oh, we don't really have that much to talk about. We have this, once a month or every other week. Tuesday morning we're going to sit down and have coffee, and we're going to you know, we'll invite all these people, whoever shows up on my team, we'll discuss whatever. And amazing projects come out of those, even when you don't think there's anything to talk about. But the other thing that's important is when you write your grant, and then you guys are writing your proposal, having that person who's the basic scientist read the clinical part and say, this doesn't make any sense to me, I don't know what you're talking about, and you reading the basic science part and saying, what are you, you know, what is this formula here? This, I don't know what this is. Those are important parts of the grant too, because if you guys can read those separate parts and really understand it, you know, you have a higher chance of the reviewers reading it, because you're going to have a basic scientist on the review team, you're going to have a clinician on the review team, and that's really important too. I think those kind of collaborations are exceedingly important. Those are the ones that I've been the most successful with, and I just really treasure them. So.
I think Brad's going to talk a little bit about sort of translational medicine, but I think one of the things, I don't want this to all be about drugs, right, because people do other things. So I think if you use the drug example, if you're studying a drug and a treatment, how similar was the last most reasonable animal model, right? Like, it's like, you know, one thing that has, you can see things where maybe all the animal models treat for 5 to 7 days, but people with your condition are usually only in the hospital for 3 days. So you're like, well, I'll just do the treatment for 3 days, right? You'd say, who did that? That sounds insane. It happens all the time, because we've seen many treatments end up failing in translation. So I think the more you can be involved with the back and forth, and Dr. Silverlight was sort of pushing for this yesterday during some of the talks about being a consumer of preclinical research. Be a consumer of preclinical research. And that may also mean, if you're doing behavioral interventions, talk to health education people, talk to behaviorists, talk to epidemiologists, talk to demographers, talk to geographers, talk to, if it has something to do with food, perhaps you'll be talking to people from the ag school. Like I said, we don't have one here, but Michigan State isn't far down the road. Think about who's doing the science that sort of sets up the pathobiology of the disease you're studying, and make sure that you can have a back and forth with them, because they may be very able and willing to say, gosh, I was collaborating with somebody who does TBI research and said, look, this marker correlates with severity, and it's sort of like, well, how much more useful would that be than just knowing that their GCS is higher, right? Like how much, there's not really a rat GCS, but you sort of get the idea. That how much more information do you get from this? Frequently you see stroke studies and they're like, well, this biomarker correlates with NIH stroke scale. Like, okay, but I can do an NIH stroke scale, right? Like, so how much more is it telling me about the NIH stroke scale? Amongst people with an NIH stroke scale of 10, can it show me the people who are going to recover versus the people who can't? But just simply correlating with NIH stroke scale. And there are basics, it may be easier to figure out, to learn about that biology and those dynamics in the basic science space than in the clinical space. And having those two-way conversations are going to lead all of us to be more successful translational researchers. So I think in terms of how that makes sense, it really depends on what you're doing. But I think thinking of just learning, reading, I think there's oftentimes, there are many clinicians, even clinical researchers, who hardly ever look at a lot of the preclinical stuff that's going on. And I would say, try to dive into it, know more about those animal models, know more about that systems biology, know more about genetics potentially. I mean, there's muscle physiology. These are the parts of medical school that I almost failed. But I can try, right? Like, and I think everybody should try too. So I think it is important. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that I think oftentimes there's this gap between the preclinical knowledge and the clinical knowledge. I think bringing those things together in a rational way is really important. And try to have this be a two-way street. It's like, this is the clinical trial I'm trying to do. Can we maybe set up a small animal model of this first to say, oh gosh, if I don't treat them for 7 days, it doesn't really work as well. And then that clinical trial in humans that I was going to do in 3 days just because somebody told me, oh, they're only in the hospital 3 days, it's fine. I mean, how often do we send people home on drips of things, right? So like, to say that it's impossible to give somebody something at home is the wrong answer, but people will tell you that. So you have to make sure that you put the science first, and what people tell you can do, you should listen to, but you should try to elevate the science over what people tell you can do. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much.